Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to talk about the Monster Manual Tactics, or the Monster Manual. Dungeons and Dragons 5e has a Monster Manual, and I have been doing Monster Manual Tactics or Monster Tactics videos for a little while now. I think this would be at least maybe the 6th one that I've done, and I thought I would continue this theme. I love monsters. I was actually part of the play test for creating the monster manual for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. And so what I thought I would do is I continue doing that because one, I'm actually finding it a lot easier to prepare that material than Hoard of the Dragon Queen episode 3. And so therefore I'm going to do another monster manual tactics workshop. And this time we're going to cover a couple of different monsters. I thought what I would do is I would cover the Vulture, which you can find near the back of the monster manual. It's on page 339. And basically a vulture is a scavenger. They're not really designed or natured in such a way that they go and attack things. They pretty much just go for a carcass that's already fallen to the ground and is either rotting or just freshly killed, and then they pick it free of all of its flesh. That's really what they do. They eat meat. That's their purpose. That's what sustains them. So when do vultures actually attack? It's very, very rare. In nature, it's not common at all. They're more likely to fight amongst themselves than they are to fight another animal whatsoever. But when they do attack, it's usually going to be because they have large numbers and they're dealing with a creature which is fairly small, or that creature is wounded or sick and easy prey and they can take it down and kill it fairly efficiently. Those are the times when a vulture will attack, and so that means that when you come across vultures, your players are not necessarily going to have a character come across vultures and have them attack. More likely going to find themselves having to scare the vultures away. That's really probably going to be the extent of an encounter with vultures, unless you're dealing with quite a large number of vultures. So how do vultures attack? Really, usually they don't. Like I said, they usually just fly in, land, and start picking a dead corpse. But if they are going to be involved, I would have them fly in and attack. They don't have flyby attack. They're very, very simple. There's not much to it. They just have a bite attack. So just have them fly in, make an attack, take the attack of opportunity, or have them land on the character or creature or beast or whatever that they're trying to attack, and just use their talons to hook in and use the beak to try to go for a section of the animal that they can sort of peck away at. They really struggle to go through the hide of some animals, so they don't usually go after big creatures that have a tough hide, so that it's going to have to be something with a thin hide, so thin skin. And obviously humans, elves and dwarves would have thin skin, so it shouldn't be too hard, I guess. But as I said, it's very unlikely that vultures will attack. Usually they're just going to be scaring them off. There might be a bit of a hindrance, and that's about the extent of it. So that is the vulture. Now, as I go through this, I did prepare material, and I'm going to go through all of that material. But if there are monsters you want me to cover, and I feel that I can talk to that monster because I've got enough experience, I will try to cover that monster in this particular video. If I feel like I can't follow it up and give you decent advice, then I won't go into it unless I've had time to sort of sit back and write some notes and do a bit of research, particularly if I haven't run it very often or it's really complicated. Some of the monsters are fairly complicated. Okay, the next monster I want to cover is the skeleton. The skeleton is on page 272, which I will actually flip to. It's not a particularly complicated creature. You'll find that most undead aren't. 272, where is it? Pop, make sure I got it in front of me so I can see it, and my notes. So on page 272, it gives you a breakdown of how skeletons work. And really, a skeleton is simply the type of undead that simply follows orders. Somebody uses necromancy to bring the skeleton to life, and it's really not true life. It's just binding everything together, and it's an automation really, and it doesn't have a lot of nonce, okay? It's not smart. It's not like they're bringing back the soul and the person who originally was part of that skeletal form. That's not the case at all. But it might retain some of the elements of that particular form from its previous life, but at a very, very limited level. So they follow orders, and there's usually a controller of some kind who will bring a skeleton to life from the body parts that they've found lying around. So they give them instructions, and they'll usually, you've got to be very careful about the instructions because they are habitual. They will simply follow the same instruction. So you need to be specific about how often they need to do it. Otherwise, if you say, okay, grab me a pail of water from the well, they'll just keep doing that, and they can do that indefinitely until the end of time. So you've got to be careful about how you actually give them instructions. Skeletons don't really care too much about whether they're destroyed because there's no preservation of life. They are dead. They've been dead. They really just do what they're told, so they don't usually run away. Unless the controller says run away, which they probably won't, skeletons don't flee. They'll stay in a combat pretty much till the end, and they might retain some of the elements of their fighting ability from its previous form, but truthfully, that's really unlikely. And they have very, very simple attacks. It's just a short sword and a short bow. And obviously, if they're at distance, they're going to use a bow, and if they're up close, they're going to use a short sword. As a general rule, I would say try to keep your tactics slightly dumbed down. Now, if you'll notice, if you have a look at the stat block, it's got a low intelligence, 6. Now, 6 isn't really a big deal, but it's the wisdom. Okay, the wisdom is 8. That's a -1. So that's below average. Okay, it's not like you're dealing with a normal human. That's below average, which means they will just take the straightest line. They'll do the most simplistic of tactics. Don't get complicated with a skeleton. Okay, and as I said, they don't usually flee. What else did I need to... Skeletons will understand what is spoken to them, provided that was the language that they spoke when that particular form was alive. But they can't actually speak themselves. So role-playing with a skeleton, like a social encounter, is going to be one-sided. It's really going to be just the player's characters doing the talking, and it's probably going to be very short before those instructions and that compliance to do what its controller said to do kicks in. So you really won't be able to talk with a skeleton for very long. Now, even though a skeleton has dark vision, they're not really concerned about where they are when they attack. They don't worry about being in the dark just because they've got dark vision so that they can give, disadvantages to the player's characters. They're not that complicated. Even if a skeleton is placed in a location where there are like barriers or a chasm or an obstruction, they won't just throw themselves off the edge to try to get to the player's character. So if there's a large valley or a hole in front of them, they'll go around the hole. They won't just step into the hole. Just to clarify that, just in case you thought that's what would take place. They're vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. Okay, the stat block states that they're vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. So something like a mace or a club will do twice as much damage, which is awesome. But just because somebody is wielding a weapon that does bludgeoning damage doesn't mean that they will avoid that particular character or that they will flee or be afraid of that character. They will just take that damage. They're not going to get that complicated about whether somebody has a weapon that does more damage to them. They don't care in the slightest. All right, where else? So necrotic energy is being used to actually bind everything together, compelling it. And essentially, if you notice, it's got a lawful evil alignment. That necrotic energy is compelling it to kill things. So if you don't give it instructions and you leave it to its own devices, it might go back to doing habitual behavior it did during its life. So if it's a miner, it would continue mining with a pick, or if it was a gardener, it would continue using a hoe or a spade, digging over a garden, something like that. Very simple things, and just continue repeating that. But if there's no instructions and it doesn't have any of that playing in, then what's going to take place is it's probably just going to attack. It's not going to do anything else. It's just going to attack things that are living. I would follow the same concept as the zombie when it comes to evil undead. Well, that's my view on it anyway. It's very quiet in here today. I was going to talk about the Awakened Tree, but then I realised that I actually need to sit down and do a little bit more information collecting before I cover the Awakened Tree. That's usually what you have to deal with when somebody awakens a tree, or you're dealing with a Trent who can awaken trees. Okay, our next monster, and I'm going to drink some water. Pardon me. Okay, so the Orc. Now you can find the Orc stat block on page 246, which I'm going to turn to right now to make sure I can do this properly. 246, 246, 246. Okay. Just to be really clear, I'm only going to cover the basic Orc, not the Orc Chieftain or the Orc Eye of Gomash or anything like that. Just the basic standard Orc. So Orcs are demanding, threatening brutes who pretty much just raid and pillage. That's their extent. They're conquerors. Their whole purpose in life is to just conquer everything they come across. They will even fight amongst themselves, but they have a lot more fun just destroying everything that is created by humans, elves, dwarves. Doesn't matter, as long as they can take over a location. That's essentially their whole purpose in life. They have a feature called aggressive. Now the aggressive feature allows them to take a bonus action, which is not like your standard action. It's a bonus action to move their speed, and they move fast enough. You know, they're moving about 30 feet like most medium-sized creatures, and they can move straight towards what they consider to be a hostile creature, which means in the opening of any kind of combat with an Orc, the chances are they're going to cover about 60 feet before they're either throwing javelins or you're having to deal with great axes wailing down on you. Okay, so they wage an endless war with all the races, as I said, roam everywhere, try to kill everything. Their bloodlust is one of the defining factors of an Orc. And that essentially means that they have no issue with fighting to the death. In fact, it's expected that an Orc will die in battle. That's the whole culture of the Orc. You don't want to die growing old, you want to die in battle in a glorious manner. I wouldn't have an Orc flee combat or battles. I think they're more likely to, if they flee, it's only to go and get their buddies so they can come back and cause more damage. They wouldn't flee like a goblin. That's not how they would operate. And you can use your dodge and disengage if you like for dealing with that. Remember, they have a bonus action which that aggressive feature only allows them to move towards a hostile creature. It won't allow them to move away faster. Now, because Orcs have dark vision, they're usually going to try to strike a settlement at night where they have the best advantage. And I would suggest that, not all of the races are going to be having disadvantage because, they don't have dark vision like an Orc, but quite a few will, and I would capitalize on that because that means disadvantage on perception checks in dim light and no perception check whatsoever, really, other than maybe to try and hear something in darkness because you can't see diddly squat. They prefer to overwhelm their foe, okay? If they're going to come into play, Orcs are going to use overwhelming forces, usually like a war band. They do send out scouting groups, but even a scouting group's going to be quite large. I would say they would engage in dialogue. Some sort of dialogue before your encounter is probably fine. Bearing in mind, though, that Orcs are quite aggressive, intimidating. They've got poor social skills. They don't get along with the other races because they're constantly conquering them all. How's it going? uh, Jeffazo. Did I get it right? You tell me if I got it wrong. So, orcs. The bottom line is you're probably going to have to deal with them threatening, intimidating the player's characters, and it's only a matter of time before it starts going into pretty much turning into a combat of some kind. It'll go badly at some point. They may engage in dialogue with the player's characters, and they're probably going to ask for all their gear, or demand, actually, probably more likely they're going to demand all their gold, all their gear. Your orcs don't. Your orcs don't. My orcs don't. I hope my... Basically, yeah, if the player's characters give up their treasure and their equipment, then an orc band may leave them alone. Otherwise, chances are they're just going to attack. Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad I got it right. Any small slight. So any small slight that you perform on an orc will result in a combat breaking out. And they usually, look, don't go trying to, if they try to get closer to the orcs, say try to cover that distance of about 60 feet, I would say a conversation with an orc is going to be about 60 feet away, and the orcs are just going to just charge after that. Trying to come closer will be considered threatening by the player's characters, and the orcs are probably just going to go wailing on them. Orcs prefer close combat, and I would suggest getting them up into combat as quickly as you possibly can. They will possibly use ambush techniques, but orcs aren't really too concerned about that. They like to just get it out there in the open and just get it on. The only time I would say that an orc is probably going to use their javelins is if they've moved 30 feet, then they use their aggressive feature to move towards a hostile creature or a creature they consider hostile, another 30 feet. That means they've covered 60 feet and they haven't been able to engage in melee combat or close quarter combat. Then they might pull out a javelin and hurl it. Okay, that's how I would play that out if I were you. Orcs really aren't fussed, as I said, about ambushes and stealth. They value strength, so it's not unusual for orcs to be found with other really strong races like an ogre or a giant, something like that. They will hang out with them. What's this? 60. 60? Yeah. Yeah, they can move. As part of their movement, they move 30 feet. But they have a feature called aggressive, which means they can move as a bonus action another 30 feet, which means in one turn, as they move towards the player's characters, they can cover 60 feet, and they still get to make an attack, whether that's throw a javelin or make a great axe attack if they want to. What am I referring to? I'm actually referring to the Monster Manual, the Dungeons & Dragons 5e Monster Manual, and you should be looking at page 246 of the Monster Manual. Hi there. How's it? Panarev, nice to meet you. Nightstone, yes, there are lots of orcs in Nightstone. And my particular character right now comes from Nightstone, so we had to deal with them not so long ago. So that is the orc. If you have any questions regarding the orc, yeah. Storm King's Thunder. We were playing that last night. Had a lot of orcs to deal with and a lot of giants and a lot of other things as well. Okay, I think unless there's any questions regarding orcs, and I can come back to the topic if you put it up, I'm going to go over and I'm going to start talking about goblins. I've been wanting to talk about goblins for a long time. It's the staple for Dungeons & Dragons, particularly at low level. Is that Jackie? Hello from the US. Yes, hi to you. I'm in New Zealand. It is about 1:40 p.m. in New Zealand on a Saturday morning. So we're going to goblins. Going to turn to them now. How can you do a workshop on monsters and not cover goblins? Seriously, Fred. Because they are actually really complicated to run. Hence, I took my time. Oh, There we are. There they are. Okay, so goblins actually cover a couple of different pages. You want to look on page 165 right through to pages 166. Okay, 165 to 166. Okay. Stupid delayed response, orc lifestyle. What's that like? Orc, God. Orc lifestyle is brutal. It's short, and it's pretty much there's going to be a lot of backstabbing. You know, trying to get to the top is what it's about. Those who are really, really brave and want to gain more strength and power from their god, Gomesh, are going to remove one of their eyes to as a as a sign of I guess reverence for their god. Sorry, but I've gotten it so much about bathrooms and such. Okay, Kay, on to the goblins from there. That's all right. I've been dealing with kitchens and bathrooms myself, and I'll probably have to do a lot of kitchens and bathrooms very shortly. Okay, so goblins. These creatures live in dark locations, okay, and they usually form very large communities. They are primarily going to be trying to use ambush techniques. They like to ambush their monsters or creatures and the player's characters. They also use traps and stealth. They're good at that sort of stuff. They have dark vision, so they can see in the dark, so they're going to use a dark environment. And they're going to use lots of cover. Now, oh my gosh, that's actually quite a lot. For a goblin who has an intelligence of 10, which isn't really that important, it's actually the wisdom. It's only got a wisdom of 8, and yet it's using actually quite complicated tactics. What's going on there? Well, because they're so soft and squishy, they kind of have to. It's a little bit like the kobold. If they don't use smarter tactics, they don't live long. They know that their buddies and their brothers and sisters and their father and their mother died early, and so they have to actually take precautions. And they like to play dirty tricks. They don't fight clean, you know. They don't fight with honor. No such thing. What do you got here? Panarive. I really like the role-playing interaction with goblins and players. Yeah, surprisingly, a lot of players really enjoy communicating with a dungeon master who's playing a goblin, particularly if you can get that squeaky voice out and maintain it. The problem is always when you try to play a goblin, you start off fine, and then of course it's hard to maintain it, unless of course you're somebody like Matthew Mercer or Chris Perkins. But back to tactics. If you have got to a point where communicating with them in a social manner has divulged into some sort of combat, or they have set up an ambush, which they probably have, they're going to want to take somebody else's stuff. And surprisingly, goblins aren't necessarily going to be helping each other out that much. They'll work as a team to start with, but then as soon as there's loot to take, they might not necessarily go and help somebody else fight one of the player's characters. They might decide to just rummage through somebody's pockets and take all their shiny things. So that's one of the interesting things about goblins. So goblins aren't very tough, particularly towards a normal person, like a normal human. They do seem tough because they've got like 7 hit points. And they're wearing armor and all the rest, but they're actually not very tough compared to like an armed contingent. So if they're dealing with like peasants who are unarmed, they don't have weapons, they're probably not going to be too concerned about their tactics with them. They're probably just going to be quite bullying. That doesn't mean they won't use them. They might be a bit more careful with somebody who's in armor and carrying weapons, because that obviously means they've had some sort of training. They use overwhelming forces, so I wouldn't have your goblins matched number for number with your players' characters. That doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. What I would go for is making sure you have more goblins than players' characters. And as soon as the numbers shift, then the goblins are going to start looking at either retreating or fleeing in some way. They can use hit and run techniques. So when they flee, they can use their disengage. It's basically called nimble escape. It's a monster feature, and it allows them to use a bonus action to disengage and hide, which is really awesome. And they can do that every single turn, which means if they do need to flee at any point, they can use a bonus action to take the disengage action. They can move, and if they want to keep going, they can use their action to move again, which means they can move a total of 60 feet, and the player's characters then have to dash up to them to re-engage them, and they can keep doing this, and there won't be any opportunity attacks. The only way to take down a goblin who is fleeing is probably to shoot them at range. So make sure they use cover when they're trying to escape. I wouldn't even bother with the dodge action. It's going to be much more efficient for a goblin to go nimble escape, use that disengage bonus action, move, and use their action again to move again. Or if you can get them into cover, then use the hide action. It's there, and they can do it, and they're pretty good at it. Okay, where was I on my notes? Running, fleeing. Okay, they prefer cover and darkness. I've already said that. And frequently their victims won't have dark vision. Goblins will surrender. So if you manage to corner them and they can't escape for whatever reason, they will probably surrender and grovel, and they're just waiting for an opportunity to escape. That's the only reason they're surrendering, is they know that they're going to get killed, and they will just whimper and grovel. And then once they've waited for the party to not pay attention, they'll try to cut their bonds and escape. I've done this with my party quite a few times, had the goblins escape later on. Now, goblins, I already talked about the nimble escape. And now, how do they attack? How do they use their feature? So, set up an ambush so you get surprise, and quite often they will have surprise. Stay in cover. Don't stick your goblins into melee, because they're probably not going to do that. Instead, they're going to prefer taking a shot, using their action. So fire their bow, their short bow, make your hit. You're going to get advantage because you can't be seen if you've managed to hide successfully from the player's characters. The goblins will get advantage on the first attack. Then they're going to move, change location, stay within cover, and use that nimble escape and take the bonus action and use their hide. And they just repeat this. Attack, move into cover or into a different location and cover, and then hide again. And you just repeat, round and round. This is how goblins would operate. If you do wind up getting them into melee combat, then, as I said, there are ways of them dealing with that. Even a slight injury to a goblin will probably result in them deciding to leave the combat. So they don't necessarily fight to the death. In fact, they probably won't. So like I said, they're more likely to surrender than risk dying. They know how their brothers, sisters, father and mother died, and they don't want to be added to the list. Okay, I've already said that goblins should start in cover. That's good. I already talked about their short bows. Make sure you keep them within the range that they can be effective at, otherwise they lose that advantage. So make sure that they are within 80 feet of the kill box or the kill zone so that they can be effective. If you put them outside of that, they're going to get disadvantage, even if they have advantage because they can't be seen. That will cancel it out, and you don't want to do that. The goblins wouldn't do that. Alright. Remember too, also, by leaving them in cover, they get a +2 bonus if they're in soft cover, or half cover, and if they've got 3/4 cover, that's a +5. So they don't need to worry about having the shield on, even if they're using the bow, as long as you keep them in cover. Okay, if the party get into close combat with the goblins, there are a couple of ways you can deal with that. I've already discussed one of them. One is using a bonus action to disengage using nimble escape, move, and then dash to escape. I've already said that. Or when they're in combat, they will attack, disengage, and move. Now the disengage will be a bonus action because of their nimble escape, so that's another way of dealing with it. Or if they are, they can also go bonus action, disengage, move, and then use their action to hide once they're in cover. And yeah, those are pretty much the tactics for a goblin. It doesn't get too much more complicated than that. Alright, so that is a goblin. I'm going to just try and drink my water. If there is a monster that people want me to cover, throw it up, and if I can do it, I will. So we're going to move on to the Roper. And I've been wanting to do the Roper for a little while, so I'll just find him. He's under R. And I don't know why I didn't write it down. I did in my notes, I didn't write the page number down. Of all things. Seriously, Fred. There we go. Oh, that was too nice and quick. So look at page 261 for the Roper. 261. Okay, so the Roper is a predator, and it's not just a predator, it's also a scavenger. So it fulfills two different purposes in a dungeon. And this particular creature, this Roper with many tendrils, will prefer to be ambushing its target. And it's going to set itself up in a cave. You're probably not going to find a Roper in a well-constructed stone dungeon. They're probably not going to be there, but maybe in a natural cave of some kind where they can use their features to their full advantage. That's where you're going to find a Roper. And they have the ability to camouflage themselves as a stalagmite or a stalactite in cave locations, which essentially means you wouldn't even be able to figure out that they are there. So it's almost pointless the players making a perception check to try and discern that they're there, because you wouldn't be able to visually see them to figure it out. You might be able to smell them, and as long as their eyes are closed, or their eye is closed, their mouth is closed, and their tendrils are withdrawn, they will look like just a natural cave protrusion. So that's their false appearance feature. So make sure you use that. You should be getting surprise on the player's characters with a Roper. Don't put the Roper on the ground. It should be attached. It can affix itself to the ceiling. So make sure you stick it on the ceiling, not on the ground. If it needs to escape, it simply can't. It's so slow. It's got a speed of like 10 feet. It can't run. It climbs 10 feet. So escape for a Roper, it just isn't really too much of an option. So don't stick them on the ground. Make sure they are attached to the ceiling. Okay. Right, I talked about perception checks being ineffective against these things, although you could maybe give them disadvantage on a perception check to try and smell the Roper. That's probably the only way you're going to pick them up. These creatures have quite a long range with their tendrils. They also have multi-attack, and that multi-attack essentially means you get 4 tendril attacks and then you can bite it, and they have a real feature. So you get 4 attempts at trying to grab something, and I would suggest going after the same target. Once you've grabbed it, reel it in 25 feet. That's how far you can reel it in. And then, if it's close enough to the mouth, then it would start biting. It can only bite one target, but you can potentially grapple with your 4 tendrils up to 4 characters. Black Devil Mamba. Hey, how's it going? We're doing the Roper. I've already done a couple of other monsters. So yes, make sure you get surprise. Make sure they're on the ceiling. Make sure you use their tendrils first. Okay? You grab them. If you're successful, you reel them in 25 feet. If they're close enough to the mouth, you bite. That's the basic tactics for a Roper. Now remember, you have quite a lot of reach. Those tendrils have a huge reach. If you have a look, 50 feet. So you can attach your Roper 40 feet, 45 or 50 feet on a ceiling, and it can still get to anything that walks underneath it, which is fantastic. It also means that once you've grabbed onto maybe 2 or 3 or possibly 4 characters, and you can only bite one, you can drop the others once you reel them up high enough, and that will cause damage as well. So that's what I suggest you do. Once you grapple them, reel them up, and if you can't bite them because you're already biting somebody else, drop them on the arse. That's what I suggest you do. Seems like a sensible tactic to me. Okay, just flip my page over here. I talked about how to do that. Don't stick the roper on the ceiling when it's outside of the ground level of 50 feet. If the ground is further than 50 feet away, its tendrils are absolutely useless. It's not a stupid creature. Okay, if you have a look, although its intelligence is 7, its wisdom is 6, so it's actually quite clever. So don't stick it too far up. Make sure it's still within reach of the ground. Okay, I've covered that. Black Mamba. Black Devil Mamba, what do you got? Can the roper be disguised like a tree? No, its feature only, its false appearance means it can only really disguise itself as a stalagmite or a stalactite. And as I said, I suggest you attach it to the ceiling. Don't put them on the ground. Panarev, got to go, sir. Love your videos. I get all giants from STK after your review. Oh, did you? Man, those giants and those miniature boxes are so cool. I couldn't help myself. I was so addicted. I bought so many. Greetings from Brazil. Wow. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. All right, so let's finish off the roper. Okay, so how do you deal with a roper escaping? Make sure that the roper has like a hole in the ceiling that it can crawl into. It's going to know it can't really escape, so if it does have to try to escape and it's only moving 10 feet, then take the dodge action and move 10 feet. That will reduce the chance of it taking too much damage. If you just dash, it's only moving 20 feet. It's not moving very fast. It's just going to get pin-cushioned by arrows or ranged spells or something like that. So dodge action and move. It's probably going to reduce the amount of damage it takes, and it's probably smart if you position your roper next to a hole in the ceiling that it can crawl into. Does that make sense? So hopefully it does. Yep, I already talked about that. I think I've covered the roper. That has covered pretty much all the tactics I would use with a roper. Would you have a conversation with a roper? Not really. I mean, I suppose you could, but what does it speak? Nothing. Sign language? No. You're not really going to have a conversation with a roper. It's a predator and a scavenger, and it sets itself up in caves. Oh, come on. Come on, camera. Get it together, camera. Focus. 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 Any tips on vampires? Full Gamer, yes, I'll give you some tips on vampires. Just let me see if I can get this stupid thing to focus for me. I don't like it when it goes all blurry. I don't know why it did that. It's just ridiculous. Hang on, I'll see if it's just the stream. Maybe it's just the stream that's causing the problem. Oh, cameras on phones are so frustrating. Maybe if I just turn it just a fraction that way, and then return it back, see if it'll reset itself. Okay, I think that might have helped. All right, just gonna give me a second, guys. I'll just reposition it so you get a decent picture of me. Okay, there we go. I fixed it. Woohoo! All right, let's move on. We might go straight into the vampire actually, because I believe I covered most of the material I was going to cover. The Githyanki warrior I need to talk about, but let's talk about vampires. Let's just open it up to that page. I ran Strahd in the Curse of Strahd on Tuesday with my group, and they killed Strahd, and yeah, it was actually really, really tricky because vampires seem really tough, and certainly at low levels they are, But higher levels, once you're reaching a certain point, they really, even with minions, they don't really survive very long. They've got 144 hit points. They've got resistance to most things, but as soon as the players have magical weapons, it doesn't matter. They can get through that damage resistance. They have a lot of different features, so they can disguise themselves. With a vampire, I would stick to trying to keep the vampire out of combat as much as possible. Remember, vampires can call on the undead, creatures of the night, so use that as much as you can. Keep them at a distance. Make sure they have lots and lots of minions that the players have to get through to get to the vampire. And also too, when players decide to go off on their own and decide to explore somewhere without taking the rest of the party because they split the party, that's a good time for a vampire to show up, because a vampire against one character is really bad news. The chances are that character won't last very long. But a vampire against an entire party at level 9 or 8 or 10 is probably not going to last too long. The vampire has legendary resistances, so you can keep rolling those saving throws, but if you fail them, make sure you use your legendary resistances. Most of your combat with any kind of 5e game is going to be about between 1 and 3 combat rounds. You might go as high as 5. If you're going longer than that, then you've designed a really complicated combat which seems more like 4e than 5e if you ask me. Also remember they have Misty Escape, and that Misty Escape allows them to, when they drop to 0 hit points, they're not actually dead. They can still float away. They're only moving very, very slow, but that doesn't matter. 20 feet, they can move through any crack that would accept air. They're like a gas, okay? And that's essentially what I did with Strahd, is I had Strahd move through the roof, through the ceiling, through the pores in it, find a gap to go back to his coffin. And they have to go back to their coffin when they are reduced to 0 hit points. If they don't, and they fail to do it within a certain amount of time, they will be destroyed. That's essentially how the vampire works, which makes them very, very tricky. Now, with Strahd, what I had is I actually had 2 coffins. I had one coffin in the most obvious location, and I gave him another vampire coffin and a mobile location that could be driven around on a carriage or a wagon that was enclosed, so that if he couldn't get back to one coffin, he could go back to another coffin. Now, not all vampires are going to do something like this. Strahd is particularly deadly and dangerous and should probably have at least 2 coffins. That would be my opinion. So remember, reduced to 0 hit points, they float back to their coffin. Black Devil Mamba. Oh, I didn't know the vampires had to back into the coffin at 0 hit points. Yeah, it's pretty clear if you have a look at page 297 under Misty Escape. When it drops to 0 hit points outside its resting place, so if it's outside its resting place, okay, the vampire transforms into a cloud of mist, as in the shape-shifting ability that it has, okay? Instead of falling unconscious, okay, it doesn't fall unconscious, provided that it isn't in sunlight or running water. If it can't transform, it is destroyed. So if something has stopped it from transforming, it can't do that. While it is at 0 hit points in its misty form, it can't revert into its vampire form, okay? And it must reach its resting place within 2 hours or be destroyed. Its resting place is its coffin. So you need to get back to the coffin, otherwise end of your vampire. Remember, these things regenerate, so if they don't take damage from sunlight or radiant damage, they can regenerate. If they do take sunlight damage or radiant damage of any kind, then they can't regenerate. And also remember that you can also push that in by using holy water. Start dumping holy water on them and regeneration just won't work. They have spider climb so they can attach themselves to the ceiling. It's really sensible with a vampire not to get up into melee straight away and to actually have them affixed to the ceiling, particularly if the players have to only shoot it at range. There's often somebody in the party who will only be any good at close quarter combat and won't be able to target a vampire stuck to a ceiling. And it's a good place to put them rather than behind their minions. On the ceiling is perfect because it can still do quite a lot of different things. They have a lot of weaknesses. How would I use them? What I tend to do is I would go with Child of the Night and summon something. You know, you only get to use it once a day, but who cares? They have legendary actions. Don't forget the legendary actions. Every time your players have a turn, at the end of that turn, make sure you take your legendary action. And you have a couple of options. One is moving. I use the movement option quite a lot to move myself around the battlefield. You can use unarmed strikes and you can bite. Problem is, usually if you're using unarmed strikes and bite, it's really too late because you're now in melee and your options are reduced as soon as you're up close. That usually means that the players are winning if the vampire's now engaged in melee combat. So that's why I would open up with Child of the Night. If you can use Charmed, that's nice, but as truthfully, I'm not terribly fond of being charming one target's just not enough. You know, how are you supposed to be effective when there's probably 3 or 4 other characters around? So, like I said, try to make sure it has minions. As soon as its minions are gone, the vampire, if it takes damage, is probably going to leave. It can come back, take a rest, and deal with them at its leisure. It doesn't need to do it today. And that's how I played it out with Strahd. Strahd sent the players off to do all sorts of things and just stalled them long enough to try to build up enough of a force to deal with them, even though he was constantly sending wolves, wargs, zombies, skeletons at the players' characters. It didn't matter. Eventually they sort of punched their way through that, got enough allies. So yeah, make sure you have minions with a vampire. I don't really want to cover the vampire too much because it is quite complicated, and I'm just going to cover the basics with that. Hopefully that answered your question, Full Gamer. If it didn't answer your question, I apologise. I will probably do a dedicated video at some point to the vampire where I've actually planned everything out and it's a bit more in detail. But something like a vampire, I feel like is like a 10-15 minute video where I've actually done a bit of research and itemised everything. It's quite a complicated monster to run, and I totally understand you wanting to know how to run it, which is why you asked that question. So last week we talked about the Githyanki, and I had a chance to have a look at the Githyanki warrior, and I wanted just to point out just a couple of things with the Githyanki, just because I didn't really address that last week. Full Gamer, yes, it helped a lot. Thank you so much. I'm glad I was able to help. I've run quite a few vampires and I've always found that as soon as they get into melee combat, usually they are losing, and that's a good time to get the heck out of there. Alright, so if you have a look at page 160, yeah, page 160, we have the Githyanki warrior. And I wanted to talk about the Githyanki warrior. There's a lot of information on Githyanki about them being raiders of the Astral Sea. They're often like pirate-like characters. They form guilds. They're more like bandits of the Astral Sea than anything else. They have their own sort of structure. I just want to talk really briefly about how you would deal with them in combat though. Because if you have a look at it, they've got a pretty good armor class. They've got half plate. They've got a reasonable amount of hit points. They're not stupid. They're quite smart. They're not intellectual, and they've got wisdom as well. And they also cast spells. And if you have a look at the spells they can cast, Mage Hand in combat is probably not going to be very effective. Something like Jump can be. It allows you to jump a longer distance. Jumping from one ship to another would be a really handy way of opening up with a Githyanki warrior as it jumps from one ship to another. Essentially, it can jump, do a long jump of 15 feet because its strength is 15. But you can then increase that by casting Jump. And you can cast Jump 3 times a day, which you're probably not going to do anyway. What's really awesome about the Githyanki Warrior is it's got Misty Step, which is a bonus action to cast. I am, okay, Boom for 89. Yes, I am taking questions on monsters, and I will take questions after the workshop for a short period anyway. So by all means, if you have questions, be prepared to put them up there, and I'll answer those questions. So with the Githyanki, either jump them from one ship to another, or use Misty Step as a bonus action, move into combat if you haven't covered that distance, and then start using their multi-attack. They have great swords, and they get to make 2 great sword attacks. That's like awesome. Fantastic. So that's how I would do it. Now, what makes them really, really bad for the player's characters is if they get into the front line, they can now Misty Step as a bonus action 60 feet. Poof. Okay, they can just Misty Step. Oh, how's it 60 feet? I think it's 30 feet, sorry. They can Misty Step, and they can get to the soft, squishy characters like the Wizard and the Bard, those characters who aren't wearing a lot of armor. So get them up, either using Jump or Misty Step, and then continue using Misty Step to get them round to the weaker characters and gang up on those particular characters, particularly Sorcerers, Bards, even a Warlock, obviously the Wizard, anything that isn't wearing a lot of armor, and then take them down. That's how they would work, which makes them a really interesting monster to play for a Dungeon Master, because all those tactics in terms of stopping them in a choke point won't work. A choke point with Githyanki Warriors isn't going to work. They can just Misty Step to the back line, get past that choke point. And that's really the extent of a Githyanki Warrior in terms of how I would run them. Would they run in combat? I feel that they are smart enough that would understand the basics of fleeing from combat. I've already done a video on fleeing from combat, whether you use a dash to get out, dodge and move, or disengage and move. It's up to you. Corey L. That's a great tip. Oh, I'm glad it was a good tip. What could be more fun than popping your monster around the battlefield to wherever you want to be? You can, not only that, you can use your Misty Step to get out of combat. It's a bonus action, pop out, and then you can move, and if you've given them, say, a ranged attack, you can make a ranged attack. But it's still pretty awesome. I love the idea. Also, too, it's much easier to get a Githyanki out of combat, because when you can Misty Step, you can move, use your move action. You can move up to 30 feet and use your action to move again, so they can cover quite a lot of distance. The chances are that catching them is going to be very, very hard. Okay, so that is the extent of my Monster Manual Tactics Workshop number 3. I didn't want to cover too much, one, because I lose my voice, and I have tried to set up the camera and the gear behind me so I can do some more videos. So if I lose my voice, I can't do that. So if you found this video helpful or informative, please share, like, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Can I say to everybody who has been sharing my videos, you guys are doing a really awesome job. I can't believe the channel has grown so quickly in the last couple of weeks or months. It's really taken off, and I was not expecting that. If you want to buy the Monster Manual and you don't already have it, I will provide a link to Amazon. It's an affiliate link below, and basically that just means I get a small commission. You get charged the same thing whether you bought it off Amazon anyway. It just means that Amazon gets less profit and I get a little bit of commission from it, which is really helpful to me. I found I actually making a little bit more off the affiliate sales than I am off the YouTube ad revenue, which is ridiculous. If you have any questions about the monsters I've talked about, you can ask those questions after this live stream, because I'm going to keep playing it or running the live stream for a little while, or you can put them in the comments. That's fine too. And until next time, keep rolling those 20s. That's one of these things here. Keep rolling those.